Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. So this is going to be the next video in the Openpyxl series. If you haven't checked out the first video, I will link that down below. And that video just goes into kind of like the very beginnings of using Openpyxl, a little bit of an introduction, as well as how to create Excel files using the Openpyxl library from Python. So for today's video, we're going to go into how to read an Excel file. So like pulling the information from an Excel file that has already been created. So the data I'm going to be using in this video comes from Open Data Toronto. So basically the city of Toronto has a website where you can go to and find data on Toronto. There's a lot of different types of data, as you can see, on a lot of different kind of topics. A lot of cities have these kinds of websites, so you can look for one in your own city or even like your own country. So the one we're going to be doing is TTC streetcar data. So this is the data I'm going to be using. As I mentioned, it is TTC streetcar delay data from 2021. This one just goes from January to August. And I'll leave the link to this data set down in the description so you can use it and follow along. But this is basically just like a preview of what the data looks like. So when we are querying that data using Openpyxl, you can kind of get an idea of what you want it to return. So the first thing we are going to be doing is importing Openpyxl, and then we're going to load the file name. So again, I'll have a link in the description of the file I used. I just have the file in the same directory as this Jupyter notebook, so I don't have to use the extension. I'm just using the name. Well, I don't have to use the full path. I'm just using the name and the extension. If the file lives somewhere else from this Jupyter notebook, so let's say you download it and it goes into your downloads folder, and maybe you have this Jupyter notebook in a different folder, you're going to need to put in the full path. So once we have that, we are going to load the workbook. So I'm just going to label this as WB for workbook, and then we're going to type openpyxl.load workbook, and then just that workbook name that we have saved in that variable. And the next thing we're going to do is kind of read information on the sheet names. So you're going to first type in that workbook variable, so wb.sheetnames. And what that's going to return for you is all the sheet names. So as you saw in our Excel file that I showed earlier, you have the sheet names January 21, February 21, just representing the month and the year for each set of data. So instead of doing that method to read all the sheet names, you can also return the active sheet by just typing WB active, and that gives you the last open sheet. So for me, that is January 21. So that was the last sheet I had opened before I closed the workbook. If you had it opened on the March 21 worksheet, that's what it would return. You can also read a particular sheet by the name. So again, we're going to call that workbook object, and then the name of the worksheet. So let's do January 21. As you can see, it returned January 21. You can also do it for like March. So when you call a worksheet like this, or even if you call it using active, it kind of returns it the name of the worksheet like this. So it will say worksheet and then in quotation marks the name of the worksheet. Let's say you just wanted this part of the worksheet to return, so the actual title. To do that, I'm going to start off by saving everything in a variable called WS, which will stand for worksheet. And then what we did earlier, workbook or WB square brackets, and then the name of one of the sheets. And then we're gonna do WS, which is the worksheet, dot title. And that's just gonna give us the actual title of the worksheet without having that kind of like worksheet keyword ahead of it. So from here, let's say you wanted to change the name of the worksheet. So maybe you don't want it to say January 21. Maybe it's a little bit confusing. You're not sure if this is the day 21. You want to make it clear that it's the year. So we're going to, again, call the same kind of ws.title. And we're going to make it equal to whatever we want it to be called. So I'm going to do Jan 2021. And of course, we're going to need to save this for it to be final in our actual workbook. So we're going to do wb.save and then the file name. And we're going to run that. So as you can see, when you open up the Excel file, the name of this sheet has been changed to Jan 2021. Just make sure, again, I think I mentioned it in the first video, when you are saving the worksheet or when you are saving the workbook, the Excel file, make sure the file is closed. So don't keep it open because a lot of times it won't actually save what you're doing. So close the file before you run that command. So now that we know how to use Openpyxl to read sheet names and change sheet names, we're going to go into how to read the actual cells. So we're going to start off with these first lines of code. So you're going to import Openpyxl. You're going to open up the Excel file and save it under the variable file name. Load the workbook, and then we're going to use the sheet August 21. So we're going to save that in WS. So first we're going to do how to just read a single cell. So you're going to call the worksheet, and then you can type in quotes any cell you want. So we'll do A1. And that just returns this kind of value that basically says cell in the sheet name and then the cell notation. So you can do this for anything. And it's that same notation. So let's say you actually want to see the value. You're going to do the same thing and just dot value. And that's going to give you the actual value that's in the cell. And again, you can do this for any cell notation. So instead of using the Excel cell notation, so like A1, B2, B1, you can call the actual row number and column number. So again, we're going to start with that WS for the worksheet, and then dot cell, and then row, which is the keyword, and you can type in any row. We'll do row 1, and then column, and we'll do column 1. And then just to print that, that gives you the same result as a WS A1 would give you. And in the same way that we did dot value, you can do dot value with this and get the actual value that's in the cell. So keep it with the same notation that we just did, that's cell and then row and column. Let's say you want to read the last row in a certain column. So you can call ws.max_row, and that will give you the last row in a column. And let's find the last row in column 7. And as you can see, you get the location of the last cell. So that's G1230 in the sheet August 21. And if you want the value, you would just do dot value. and it returns 6, which is the last value in column 7. And as I mentioned earlier in this video, as well as my previous video, just remember that with Openpyxl, the notations start at 1, or the indexing, I should say, starts at 1. So unlike Python, where you would start from like 0 and you're counting 0, 1, 2, 3, in Openpyxl you're starting from 1 and counting 1, 2, 3. So just keep that in mind if you're using numbers to call to index. With Openpyxl you want to start at 1. And the same way we did this with max row, you can also do max column, which will give you the last value in a row. So if we're going to go into row 1, you can equal column to the max column. This gives you the last column in the first row, which is equal to the word vehicle. And you can also just remove value, and that will give you the actual location, which is J1. Okay, so now that we've gone through how to read a single cell, we're going to start going into how to read multiple cells. So the easiest way to do this is to stick with the Excel notation. So again, we're going to call WS, which is the worksheet, square brackets, quotations, and then you can call a range of cells. So we're going to do A1 to J1, which are the header rows in our example. And then when we run that, that gives us the location of each cell in the worksheet. So you can also do this for the whole workbook. So in this example, our workbook spans from the column A to J. So I'm just going to remove the 1. So it just reads A:J. And then you run that, and then it'll give you the location of every single cell in our worksheet. So you can also do this for a column. So if you want to read column A, it's just going to be square bracket and then in quotations the letter A. You run this, and it will give you the location of every single cell in column A. And then if you want to do the same thing for rows, instead of letters, you're going to use numbers. If you remember what Excel looks like, the columns are notated with letters and the rows are notated with numbers. So if we want to read row 2, you would just type in 2, run this, and it'll give you the location of every single cell in our workbook that is in row 2. So kind of like what we went through with the previous example when we were reading just cells, if you wanted to read the actual value, you do dot value, right? Now with this, when you're reading an entire row or an entire column or the entire workbook, it's not going to work. So like in this example, if I do dot value and run this cell, it's going to give me an error. Same thing if I did it in a range like we had earlier. A1 to J1, and then if I had dot value, it's going to return an error as well. So there's a different method for reading multiple rows or multiple columns. Basically just a different method for reading multiple cells, which I'm going to go through right now. So instead of using this notation, we need to do a for loop in order to access multiple cells. So let's say we want to read an entire column. So we're going to start off with typing. If you know anything about Python notation with for loops, that's really going to help you with this. So we're going to start off with for C, and that's just what we'll call it. You can call it anything. So for C in WS, which is our worksheet, and then we're going to follow the same notation that we were doing earlier. So square brackets, and then in quotes, we're going to type in the column letter that we want to read. So let's say we want to read column B, and then we'll type colon, indent the next row, and then we're going to do print C dot value. And then when you run this, this will give you everything that is in column B, which corresponds to the line for the streetcars. And if you want to do row, it's basically going to be the same thing. So we're going to start off with for R. Again, it can be anything you want there. So for R in WS, which is our worksheet, and then we're going to do square brackets, and we're going to type in the row number that we want to read. So let's say we want to read row 2, and then colon, print R dot value. And then when you run that will give you all the values in row 2. And finally, let's say we want to read the actual values in the entire workbook. So we're also going to keep it in a for loop. So we're going to type in for I in range 1 to WS max row, which we talked about earlier. So from the first row all the way down to the last row in the Excel worksheet. And then we're going to type in for cell in WS I. Row is going to be equal to cell dot value. And then we're just going to print row. And then we're going to run that. And that is going to give us all the values in the entire worksheet. As always, I will leave a link in the description box to the code that was used in this video. So that's all for today's video, the second video in the Openpyxl series. I hope you guys enjoyed. Definitely stay tuned for the next video in the series. Let me know if you have any questions down below, or if you have any ideas for future videos in this series you want me to do, and I'll definitely get to that for you. So hope you enjoy again. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye.